Welcome, everyone. This is the first panel of the Silicon Valley Talks series. That series is presented by the Silicon Valley Archives, and today's panel will be on the subject of mentorship, a conversation with John Simpson, Paul Yock, and Kate Garrett. It's co-hosted by Stanford's Byers Center for Biodesign. I'm Henry Lowood. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Harold C. Hobach Curator in the Stanford Libraries. I'm the curator for the History of Science and Technology collections, as well as heading the Silicon Valley Archives here on campus. This event, which is the first in a series, is starting up now to kick off a year of events and programs leading up to the opening of the new Silicon Valley Archive space in the Cecil H. Green Library on campus, the main library on campus. You see behind me an artist rendering by the architects of the new space that will be our home, which will be named Hobach Hall, currently the east wing of the library on the ground floor. The space has been cleared fairly recently and construction is about to begin. The opening of the space is planned for the beginning of next year, so right about this time next year. Please stay tuned for that. Well, everything I've mentioned so far, from Hobach Hall to the Silicon Valley Talk series and my curatorship, was made possible by a generous gift from the late Harold Hobach, from Marilyn Hobach, and from the Hobach family. Today's panel on mentorship, in fact, is in keeping with Harold's desire that the history of Silicon Valley play a part in passing forward what his generation learned, passing that forward to future generations of students. Apropos Harold Hobach, Harold, I'm sure many of you know this, Harold was a prominent patent lawyer hereabouts in the Valley. His obituary in Palo Alto Online noted that those who knew Hobach also pointed to his admiration for those innovators who turned Silicon Valley into the world's preeminent tech hub. In that spirit, about 20 years ago, he began to commission a series of paintings honoring those innovators, and each one of those paintings was devoted to a specific field of innovation. The painting you see now on the screen shows innovators in the field of medical device technology, and the reason I'm showing it to you is that it just so happens that two of the luminaries depicted in this painting, those would be John Simpson in the very middle, and Paul Yock, center right next to him. They will be joining us in a few minutes as panelists. Before we get to that point, however, let me introduce the moderator of the panel, Dr. Leslie Berlin. I've known Leslie, and I'm sure Leslie, like me, is a little bit wary about admitting this. I met Leslie first as a graduate student here over 25 years ago, and she's been a colleague of mine, I don't know, probably for about 20 years at this point. Simply put, just to put it in one statement, Leslie is the historian of Silicon Valley. There's no doubt about that. After she completed her PhD in history here at Stanford, she became the project historian for the Silicon Valley Archives. And I will tell you that she's the author of two important books. Please go out and read them if you haven't already. The first was a biography of Robert Noyce. It built on her Stanford dissertation and is titled "The Man Behind the Microchip, Robert Noyce and the Invention of Silicon Valley." It was published in 2005. Her second book is Troublemakers, Silicon Valley's Coming of Age, published in 2017. Allow me to quote Eric Schmidt about Troublemakers. "The publication of this book is a landmark event. Kaleidoscopic, ambitious, and brilliant, the book draws on a dazzling cast of characters to chart the rise of the 5 industries that have come to define technology today and collectively to remake the world." So that's not bad at all. And now, to begin our panel, here's Leslie Berlin.
Thank you so much, Henry, and thank you everyone for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here today among these incredibly esteemed panelists. I mean, one of the best parts of the work that I do is that I have the chance to spend time with and learn from people like John Simpson and Paul Yock and Kate Garrett. And introducing this trio is really tough because they have done so remarkably much, and we have so little time. I am the least interesting person among this group, and I know we want to get to hearing about them. So I'll go ahead and tell you, just to give you a sense of scale, the fundamental technical innovations that these three people developed have impacted the lives of tens of millions of people. These three people with me, tens of millions of patients. And what we're talking about here is saving lives and saving limbs and making it less likely that people coming off of ventilators develop pneumonia. I mean, this is really important stuff. And yet their ego to talent ratios are, it has to be among the best on the planet. And these are incredibly humble and good people. So let me get a little more specific about what they've done. Dr. John Simpson is joining us today, and his invention of the over-the-wire catheter absolutely redefined interventional cardiology. And by my count, he's also started at least 7 companies. Many of these have been very successful, but not only in the way that most people count success in business, but also by John's own measure, which is improving patient outcomes. And it's a real honor to have Dr. Simpson with us today. Also joining us, and equally an honor, is Professor Paul Yock. Paul developed a series of devices that revolutionized angioplasty, including the rapid exchange stenting and balloon angioplasty system, which is now the primary system in use worldwide. And Paul is the Martha Meyer Weiland Professor of Medicine at Stanford and founder and director of the Stanford Byers Center for Biodesign. And I mean, it's just an embarrassment of riches. Also joining us is Kate Garrett. She holds multiple patents in the field of interventional catheters. She's a former Biodesign Innovation Fellow here, and she also founded Ciel Medical, where she served as CEO until its acquisition by Byers. And today she's a managing partner at Sonder Capital and assistant director of the Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. And I mean, I feel like I'm selling you Ginsu knives, but wait, there's more, because on top of everything else they've done, these three have made it an active goal of their lives to help the people coming after them make a difference in the world. They're the embodiment of mentors. And what's incredibly cool for our purposes is that these three form an interlinked chain of mentors and mentees. Kate considers Paul one of her most important mentors. Paul considers John one of his most important mentors. And John wants to point to mentors of his own. And so I thought that a great way to start would be for each of our panelists to tell us about their own mentors. And John, I was hoping that you could kick us off. Could you, like, when you think of your own mentors, who do you think of?
Well, Leslie, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this program. And I will answer that very complicated question after I say hello to Doug and Marilyn Hobach. I haven't seen Marilyn for a while, but I have some great stories about Harold, which we'll save for a different venue, I suppose. You know, I would have to also say that Harold Hobach, probably more than anyone else, allowed me to connect with medical device development through Ray Williams, who introduced me to Harold. And Harold was the one who told me that we could patent our device, and I had no idea what a patent even was at that time. So I would say that Harold was a very special, and also the person that rented me my first space for a clean room with a shag carpet, which was slightly conflicted with modern clean room standards, I would say. But if you want to talk about my own, who I would say my mentors were, I would think of Tom Fogarty as really a very special person who gave me a ton of direction And then Andreas Grunzig, who was the inventor of the angioplasty concept from Zurich, Switzerland, actually originally from Frankfurt in Germany. And I met Andreas, was introduced to Andreas in Zurich. But Grunzig was a special person because he's so focused on how important it was to have really good patient outcomes. And I really hope that I have endorsed that philosophy that if you do something that's special that makes a real difference in the patient outcomes, then you have something that's an important contribution. I always say if you want to change the color of a catheter, that's kind of interesting, but not very. So that wouldn't appeal to me so much. So I think from my experience with these two mentors, what they both set really great examples for, I think, how to work and be interactive. And we know, and Paul and I've had, I don't know, countless discussions about this, and that I think there are two ways to do mentorship. One would be as the way that Paul is doing it. It has done it very, very, very successfully, no doubt about it, through the Biodesign program. And Kate is absolutely confirmation, that works. My approach to mentorship probably is a little bit more, I think, what the right term is, maybe a little bit more organic, or, I just really enjoy working with people that are a lot smarter than I am. So that's a pretty low bar there. It doesn't take too much, but I'm just really eager to watch the younger people develop and always go off and do something on their own, which is the kind of the special feature of that. So I think mentorship for me is a little bit more organic, maybe sort of homegrown, and just working really hard to try to see the younger group progress and succeed. That being said, I would also like to point out that mentorship, from my perspective, I know that I have a role, but you have a mentor and you have a mentee. The mentee is vital to the whole process, and you really need mentees that want to be mentored. And you might be surprised to know that not all mentees want to be mentored, and it's really the ones that really do want to learn and want to progress. So some mentees come in with the attitude that they already sort of know all that they need to know, and that's something to be aware of. And I think as mentors, it's important for us to make certain that we provide all the opportunities that we can, and they're not going to be 100%, but all that we can provide to make sure that all the younger people are successful. So that's kind of my perspective on mentorship, kind of two groups, but it is it's a combination. You have to have mentors that really care, and you have to have mentees that really want to learn.
Thank you for that. And before I forget, for our audience, you can send in questions via the Q&A button, and we'll be able to get to a few of those at the end of the conversation. John, when you think about Andreas Grunzig or Tom Fogarty, is there a specific something that you think of as having gained from either of them? Something that you feel like they really took you under their wing on specifically?
Well, I think Andreas set a great example, and I think that would be the part that I can't be honest with you. I can't say that I worked with him. He's in Zurich, Switzerland. I was at Stanford. I didn't work with him on a daily basis. And so as a mentor, perhaps it was just seeing and observing the way he worked, the way he related to his patients, the way he related to the hospital and other staff members, that was really, really, I thought, compelling. Fogarty, I worked with a lot more closely, and Tom did all of my standby surgery for me at Sequoia Hospital when we first started doing angioplasty. And in that era, you had to have a standby surgeon on call all the time. So Tom did that. He had just a prince of a guy. And Tom sometimes didn't see things the way I saw them, and you may know Tom, he will tell you if he sees it the way you see it, or if he does not, you're going to know that too. That's one of the things that I just love about Tom. He is so direct, so no BS with Tom. So I would say that the key element of all of this is communication, and being able to share ideas and and Tom had a lot of ideas always, and was kind of happy to share them. Happy to say that, you know, some of the stuff that I was working on was not going to work, and sometimes he was right, but you know, sometimes he was wrong. So that was kind of Tom could deal with that. Probably Andreas maybe a little bit less, because I think he's a little bit more compartmentalized in the way he thought about catheters, and than Tom, who's more of a universal thinker, let's say. But that gives you a little bit of my perspective on that.
Super. Yeah, it's reassuring actually in this time where all of our work is remote, to think about how you can have people who you aren't working with directly who can sort of model the sort of behavior that you're going for. And Paul, tell us about your mentor, John Simpson.
Sure. Well, I've been lucky to have actually great mentors all the way along, but John did stand out. And I guess for a few reasons. First of all,
he's making all of this up. I just
now, you know, the thing. So everybody in the audience can tell already. John has a big dose of charisma. So when I was in training, we all wanted to be John Simpson. I mean, the guy was, you know, pioneering a whole new field with catheter treatments, angioplasty. Maybe more subtly, he was pioneering a new career pathway of physician entrepreneur. That was not common when John was starting out. And he was, you know, bold and confident, and had that great Texas voice, and attracted people around him, talent. It started to look like a Camelot with a cowboy, King Arthur. It was really fun.
Cowboy is the key. Cowboy.
Two other things quick. One was he was providing information that you couldn't get anywhere else. It was a time in history when angioplasty was just starting. But for me, more importantly, how to be a technology innovator, that was completely opaque, not something that you learned in the university. So that knowledge was essential. And then the most important thing is John made it feel doable to be an innovator. Before my time with him, I hadn't thought about trying to be an inventor or entrepreneur, and just watching him breathing the same air, he paid attention to me. He listened to things I said. Some of my ideas he thought were good, and he encouraged me and connected me. He sent me to Harold Hobach to write one of the major patents early on. So that's once over lightly.
And did you ever have a specific moment where you said, Dr. Simpson, will you be my mentor and I can be your mentee? Or was this something that was more evolved? And did you feel that you were actively seeking a mentor at the time?
Well, I did actively seek him out, because he was, you know, way out ahead in terms of this angioplasty procedure, and you know, actually had left Stanford because the leadership at Stanford didn't see much future in angioplasty. And so he went up to another hospital, and I tracked him down to work and get some training there. So the start of that was because I wanted the clinical training. The other part was accidental of you know, seeing what a inventor entrepreneur is like.
Fascinating. Yeah. And Kate, what is your mentorship story?
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share some of my experience with Paul. I first learned of Paul, and actually, John, you as well, in my first year out of college. I was working at a startup in Seattle in the peripheral vascular space, and spent most of my time in the R&D lab testing our product against the Silverhawk, which was the flagship product at one of John's companies.
I've heard of that.
And I think maybe outside of your engineers, I might have spent the most time with that product, John. and simultaneously trying to brainstorm ways to integrate the rapid exchange system, which is of course one of Paul's iconic inventions. So I have known of them for many, many years, but it wasn't until I was accepted to the biodesign program that I had the chance to actually meet Paul in person. And I've since had the good fortune to work with him as a fellow in the program, as an alumni advocate, and now as a member of the faculty. And when I reflect back on my time, that I've learned from Paul, I think, of course, there's so much on the innovation process side and how to innovate and bring products to patients. But I really think one of the most important ways we mentor is through our actions. And if I were to pick one thing that Paul has taught me, it's the power of humility and kindness. And I think anybody who interacts with Paul would come away saying he's so nice. I probably haven't heard that said more times about anybody else in my life than Paul. But I really had the chance in my role at Biodesign now to see the impact of those qualities of his. And I think the first example is that I never cease to be amazed by the depth and breadth of industry experts, entrepreneurs, community leaders that Paul has been able to attract to the biodesign program over the last 20 years and keep them involved. Many of these people are volunteers. They do it on top of their professional schedules, and it's something that they're inspired by Paul. They do it because they're inspired by him and his kindness and how much he's given back. And so that has always made a big impression on me. I've also seen it within the dedicated team at Stanford. So we recently did a deep dive with the faculty and staff on organizational culture. And probably the dominant recurring theme that emerged was everyone's appreciation for the tone that Paul has set by being such a humble and thoughtful leader. And so as I, reflect on organizational structure, an organization is only as strong as the people that you can attract and keep there. And I have just time and again been awed by Paul's ability to bring incredibly talented people into his sphere.
I think I'm glad I showed up on this panel. This is thank you, Kate.
I actually think that that's a really important point, is that I do think I think kindness is underappreciated as a leadership quality. It's an element of it's just another form of generosity, I think, and for it to be extended as sort of just the way you interact from the beginning. I mean, that is such a gift, because it can be scary to. I mean, I was so glad that I first met John and Paul before I knew what they had done, because it can be scary to approach people who are highly accomplished, So I think you're right, making it easy and people feel welcome, I think, is really important. Kate, if you don't mind continuing on that theme for a second, if you were giving advice to mentors or mentees, or if you were thinking, another way to ask it is sort of, what are the responsibilities of a mentor or a mentee? I mean, what would you list?
Yeah, I think, and I'll give an example maybe on each side. I think, from a mentor perspective, I think one of the most important things is to put the mentee's best interest first in the relationship. And I know, having spent my career in industry, that can be challenging sometimes because you have conflicting responsibilities. You have an obligation to the organization, but you also are having an obligation to the mentee. And so I think, being able to kind of step outside of that and really put the mentee's best interest first is a sign of a great mentor. I think, from a mentee perspective, I'll pull on something John started to talk about in terms of, people who are willing to be mentored and want to learn. I think probably the biggest piece of advice is that you listen and you learn from somebody who is mentoring you. And that doesn't always mean that you do exactly what they say. It's not that at all. But I think what's important is that you reflect on what you hear and learn from them and see them doing, and you show them that you're learning and growing and that has impacted you in some way.
So Leslie, could I expand on what Kate has said a little bit? Because I think Paul has mastered that. And that is really, he has a lot of strengths, but that is really one of them that Kate has alluded to, is that you have to be able to communicate with people that's not in a threatening way. You don't want to put them on make them defensive. You want to tell them that maybe this is not such a great idea, but Paul has a really good knack for being able to say, no, without just really creating this sort of alarm. It seems to me. And I think that's the communication element that has driven Paul's success with mentorship, in that he can communicate all kinds of ideas without turning off the mentee. Let's say, having had some experience with, I haven't always been that successful at doing that, but I do, Kate, I agree with you. I think that's really one of the key elements.
See, that's what I would say you're good at, John. So we can talk after class about that.
we have that debate later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting because it's totally consistent with this idea of putting the interests of the mentee first. Like, if your interest is showing that you're right and you know more than they do, and they basically walk away and never want to do it again, then you've failed as a mentor. You know, I remember when my husband coached soccer, he was told that this was not competitive soccer, that the measure of a successful coach was whether or not the kids signed up for the next season. And it sounds like that's something that mentors need to be bringing to the table as well, that sort of thinking. Paul, how about you? Advice or a sense of responsibility for mentors and mentees?
I don't know that I have a lot to add. I guess just that for mentors, I think you have to find the enjoyment in that. And for me, there is nothing more fun than dealing with somebody young who is trying out ideas, and I think I'm lucky that's I can't think of a better way to spend time than doing that. And so I think if you can, as a mentor, sort of steer things into a zone where you're enjoying it too, because that just multiplies your impact, and it forms a better relationship, which is really the heart of what a good mentor-mentee process is like.
And I have a ping here to remind people that they can send in questions where they're adding up, but it's your chance too. Paul, what do you think when people are looking for a mentor? Is that a process that you imagine would take a while? Is that something people should just sort of, follow your gut instinct and that's it? And what do you have to say on that matter?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's one thing potential mentees don't understand, is that you have to shop. It's a process. You should be really aggressive about meeting different people and figuring out both who has the knowledge base that you want to tap into, but really importantly, what's the chemistry like? And we tell our fellows and students, so when you're trying to find that person in your job, just ask yourself the question, is this person, mentor, going to take responsibility for my career? Are they really going to try to do something to promote my career? And try to get a sense in your conversation with them whether they have that DNA. And if they don't, then keep looking.
Super. I'd like to talk a little bit about, we've been talking here directly about sort of one-to-one mentorship in a lot of ways, about the sort of passing the baton. And I know something that has preoccupied biodesign for a long time, and the rest of the world luckily has caught up, is the question of how do you do mentorship where there are many batons, where there's not just one golden baton that's getting passed in a selective way, but that it's reaching lots of people, and especially people who haven't been part of these sorts of conversations before. There's a whole world of people who would, in the olden days, never have had the opportunities that we know the world is going to be better the more people who are in the conversation. So how are we broadening this conversation and making it so that we have the broadest possible representation as we start to make these sorts of choices around mentors and careers and all of this? It's a huge question that I'd love your thinking on. Kate, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with some thoughts on that. I think, one of the first steps is to recognize that we all have, much like unconscious bias in our own perceptions of the world, maybe unconscious filters or things in our lives that have put a certain milieu of people around us. And I think, so when I think about mentorship and broadening it outside of where we traditionally are with that one-to-one baton or mentoring people in our kind of ecosystem that has occurred organically around us, I think a really important thing is consciously making an effort to change that. And that can be, a simple thing is looking around you and the people that you mentor, and do they all look like you, or do they all have certain characteristics? And if the answer is yes, you're really consciously trying to change that. And that's more, again, sort of one-on-one, Leslie, but I think there are, ways to get involved into programs and other things that are trying to expand. There are many programs that are starting now to try to expand that, instead of one-to-one baton, one-to-many. And I know Stanford Biodesign has a list of those that we, happy to share, and we keep online. So,
Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess what I would add is we haven't done a good job. Well, we're 20 years old now, and I would say, I'm a little embarrassed to say, it's just been in the last few years that we've really started paying serious attention to this question. Our whole field has not done a good job, but we're certainly reflective of that. And it's been people like Kate actually had a big role in evaluating how we're approaching gender, and has gone on to other axes of diversity. But we're in the process of really trying to reorient ourselves and look very carefully at what has been a passive process of just taking the best and brightest out of a very small ecosystem into our program. And I think all of us are committed to doing better than that going forward.
I have many questions coming up here, and so I'd love to ask a few of them. One of these is I think quite relevant to the conversation that we were just having, which is, do any of the esteemed panelists have a mentor who is in someone who is younger? And so it also says and or of a different gender, but that, I think Kate and Paul answered that part. If so, could you please describe the nuances of this dynamic, one that's in stark contrast to the traditional structure of an older mentor and younger mentee, often of the same gender? Does anyone come to mind for you guys?
Yes, I can certainly plead guilty to the older version. mentor and mentee. Although I've many mentees of younger women, but my mentors were not.
Yeah, and I think, you know, sometimes the line between mentor and mentee is blurry, right? Because there are things one can teach the other and vice versa. And so I think, you know, I am younger, so the span of people below me is maybe smaller, but still I have had the opportunity to be in a mentorship relationship, which maybe at face value would have looked like I was the mentor and they were the mentee. But in reality, I have learned a lot from them and from their perspectives. And so I think it's, yeah, I think there's age and gender don't really necessarily correlate with, you know, learning that can occur.
And I'll throw in what was a striking example for me in the last couple of years, and last year in particular, and that is in the diversity area. So I mentioned Kate already. Uday Kumar in our program, who's younger, who was a fellow, has in a nice way taken me to task and taught me you know, what it really means to try to be a more diverse program. I'm very grateful for that.
I'm just going to keep asking these as they come, and know that I'm thanking you all for your answers every single time. We have a lot of great questions here. Should you always go into a mentor-mentee relationship with goals developed? What if you don't know those goals necessarily, but you're exploring? How do you start out this relationship if you don't already know your mentor that well? Let's see. John, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so I really do not believe that you could actually have well-defined goals from the very beginning. I think that probably is somewhat conflicted a little bit with a good mentee-mentor relationship, but you can have goals about the space that you're in. So if it's medicine, or if it's business or veterinary, I want to be a vet, so I can identify with that. But I don't really, I don't know how to say that if you're too narrow in your perspective when you start, then I think that can limit the opportunity. Now, if you have to have enough information so that you know that somebody to approach. So, you know, if it's in medicine, you're going to end up trying to find somebody in medicine or device, medical or biotech, something to do. But I don't really, the whole concept that you come in with really, you know, I can't really look for a mentor until I have really well-defined goals. I don't know. That doesn't seem like that would be a very good strategy. I like to sort of think of one of the great compliments that a professor at MD Anderson paid to me one time. He said, well, one thing about John, he said, actually, he doesn't have a box. So you talk about thinking outside the box. He doesn't have a box. So I took that as well, I know him pretty well. I think he might have been trying to pick it on me a little bit, but also I thought it was a compliment. So I would say that's you know, what you're looking for. You want to look for somebody who thinks outside the box, is in my opinion.
And I know that when I was younger, I would have killed for a script, even if I was going to modify it, of sort of like, how do you approach someone who you think might be a potential mentor for you? What advice do you have there? Paul, do you have any advice? What's worked well for you and when people approach you?
Well, the pragmatic piece of advice, I guess, is to get an introduction by somebody who your potential mentor knows, and just use that as a door in. And then the second piece of advice is just go for it, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? Is you have to go on to somebody else.
Yeah, I want to echo that comment, Paul, because I think I certainly, have had a tendency early on in my career, surrounded like people like Paul and John. It's really intimidating to ask them for help or for mentorship because they are so successful. And when I left Biodesign and was founding my company, we were going to reach out to somebody to be on our board, which it was not an investor role. It's really just a mentor advisory role. And there was somebody named Jay Watkins who we thought was perfect for this. And I told my co-founder, I'm just embarrassed to ask. Like, this is so below him. He's so successful. And my co-founder turned to me and said, what do you have to lose by asking? And I said, you know what? You're right. And we asked, and Jay said yes. And it has led to just a really incredibly influential relationship in my life and success of the company. And so I just want to echo Paul's comment, just go for it. What do you have to lose by asking?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A couple questions I'm going to blend together. There's a question around what's the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. There's another one that, where did this one go? About, do you have any tips or recommendations or best practices for people who find themselves serving as someone's mentor and supervisor at the same time? There can be role conflicts there, and it can be a common situation for people to find themselves in. So we've got supervisors, we've got mentors, we've got sponsors. How do you think about all of those roles kind of working together?
Can I take a run at the mentor sponsor one? Because that really resonated as a question for me. So I'd like to suggest that there is not good mentorship without sponsorship. That when you take on a role as a mentor, that is part of what you should be doing, is really working to try to help that person achieve what their goals are, the promotion or whatever. I think that should be the bar we set for good mentorship.
I will keep going. These are just adding in. How do you recommend that seasoned mentors continue to up your mentorship game? How are you seeking to improve as mentors yourselves?
Well, that's got to go to the really old guy here who has the most reason to continue to try to improve his game. I would say that I love still working with the engineers. We still have engineers that we work with. I think I up my game. I don't know if that's the right term, but I want to stay really engaged in the technology that's being developed and help with the development of it and help with the thought process and sometimes help with, a video camera recording of the device breaking or something along those lines. I want to be just, I don't know, I want to be involved across the board to the extent that I can, and I can add value. I'm not very strong in, boardroom management. Jay Watkins know him really well. He's amazing. He's partnered with him in a venture firm, and he is just special. But he can just do stuff I can't do, and I think I do stuff that he can't do. So that's what we all need to know about mentors and mentees, is that there will be a wide variety of options, and not directly responsive to your question, but I think you need to seek out mentors, even if they're in my age group, that want to continue to learn and to progress. I think that would be key.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think it's, as a mentor, keeping an openness to wanting to learn, and also continuing to reach out for opportunities to be a mentor is an important way to learn. And I think re-emphasizing an earlier point, but trying to mentor people of diverse backgrounds and not always the same phenotype, again, to continue to learn and to continue to expand your ability to impact.
So Leslie, I should not be asking questions, but I do want to ask one question of Kate, because the big dilemma that I see in the medical device space and also just in medicine in general is the gender gap is still not, it has not gone away. And I would love to be able to recruit very diversified engineering talent to a couple of companies that I'm working with currently, and I just can't find it. Do you have any advice for me where to look? In North Carolina or in California, either place?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think a lot of it, especially in startups, we recruit through our networks, right? And I was struck, a good friend of mine is the CEO of a startup company in the Bay Area. And I got a text from an employee of his, who's also a good friend, who said, yeah, we just added an independent board member and it's another man. We have 5 men on the board and no women. And we had this opening and she had asked the CEO and his response was, well, I couldn't find any candidates. And I heard that and I thought, I could have sent you a list of 20 qualified women for the board. So I think, John, my practical thing would be, reach out to other women who might have contacts and networks in the engineering space. I certainly do. I think, even though there's few of us, we're so willing to help and kind of expand those connections. And that's just where it starts, is making connections.
Yes, I think that's great advice, and it's a very serious question. I thank you for taking it seriously, because I do believe, when I reflect a little bit on one of the companies I'm involved with right now, it turns out that all the technicians, well, not all, but most of them are Vietnamese, and they're mostly women, and they're incredibly talented beyond belief. But the board is all white males. And so we need to be, that just needs to change, and we had to figure out kind of how to do that.
We actually have a lot of questions along these lines. Do you have recommendations for seeking mentors or mentees outside of formal institutional or commercial arrangements? Another version of this question is, how do I find a mentor outside of my particular company? We just have a number of these. How can you kind of, well, let's leave it to those two. Like, given that we already know that our personal networks have inherent limitations in how we find people, are there ways to find mentors that you found particularly successful outside of personal networks? Are there things like when we heard about Dr. Simpson and Dr. Grunsig, are there ways of now when I think about all of the things that the generation after me and the one after that have learned from sort of watching people online. There's certainly things you can learn in that way. Can you think of developing a mentor relationship beyond your personal networks or your institutional networks? And if so, what recommendations do you have for that?
Well, the yield.
One thing, this may be sort of self-evident, but one thing that I didn't see my own kids taking advantage of as well as I wished is their own university alumni groups, and use that so you can find out who in your college's alumni list is in your field. It takes a bit of work, but those people will generally answer an email, and that gets you out of your own bubble of connections as one suggestion.
I think building on that, LinkedIn does work. I mean, you can cold contact people with a thoughtful message attached to it. You may not get 100% response rate, but you may get 1 in 10 to respond, and that's how it starts.
Okay, Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot because you are specifically called out for this, and you should feel free to say you're not interested in this. This says, oh, it actually involves two of you. John or Paul, would you take on the role of a prospective mentee, a novice, a recent grad, etc., and approach Kate as a prospective mentor? I would like to see an example of how this would unfold.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I followed the question.
This person is wondering if we could see what it actually looks like to approach a prospective mentor. I don't know if that sounds like fun to you, or if you feel like, no, I don't want to do that.
And is the point that it's a younger person, or is that the flavor?
I think the idea would be for Kate to be in the role of a mentor, and
Right.
one of you two to be in the role of a mentee.
Well, I'll take a little pass at it because this is art imitating reality. So, Kate, I would say I'm having trouble understanding what we can do to promote gender diversity and a sense of inclusion for our women in our program. And I wondered if you would be willing to meet with me or Zoom and talk about that.
And I think what's behind Paul also is, you know, if I didn't know him at all, I would need some context for who Paul was. So some kind of framework. But even if I never met him, if I understood what he was doing at Biodesign and his goals, and even forget the many, many accolades that come with Paul, but just his personal vision and what was behind this question, I mean, my answer would be absolutely yes. So I think, you know, approaching with a request and some context as to what's behind that can be a very successful way to get somebody to say yes.
And I've already asked for Kate to help me
Good point.
That's
finding
true.
a more gender specific engineers and folks to be involved with.
And we have a few questions here about mentorship over time and over distance. So here's a question. How can the mentoring relationship be somehow captured, archived, so that future historians can understand how it was done and its value? What do you at the Byers Center do to formalize the sorts of learnings that you guys have gathered on this front? How are you capturing those, and how are you kind of making sure they'll be available to future generations?
Do you want to start that, Kate, or?
Go ahead, Paul, if you're.
Well, I want to go back to a distinction John made right at the beginning, which is I think there's informal mentoring and more formal mentoring. More formal mentoring is content and process and how you do things and how you build skills and so on. That part we do archive and teach and put in videos and textbooks and so on. What I don't have an answer for is the secret sauce of the informal mentoring that is relationship based, and I'm at a loss for saying how you kind of archive that or keep that going.
I mean, it's a little bit of a self-serving answer, but given for our two organizations, but I know one thing that we've been doing in collaboration, the Byers Center and the Silicon Valley Archives, is conducting a series of oral histories where we're really giving, and John was one of our very first, giving people a chance to talk in depth about these sorts of relationships and what they've gained and what they've been able to give. So hopefully some combination of capturing the formal parts that you're talking about, Paul, and then those very individual personal experiences that different people have had. Maybe that'll be able to help. I've gotten the note here that we might, nope, here comes Henry. So when Henry joins us again, as he's done now, that is my signal that it's time to wrap up. And I want to thank our wonderful panelists, John and Paul and Kate. I mean, this has been such a treat and such an inspiration. And I'm sure there are people all over the world right now, you know, silently sitting in their living rooms, clapping their hands. And I wish you could see them all, because I know they're there. So thank you so much. And I'll hand this back off to Henry now to close the discussion.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll ask everyone just to stay on for about a minute or so. I'm going to convey a couple pieces of information to you. But first, I want to thank Leslie, of course, and I want to thank Kate and John and Paul, our panelists, for this last hour. It's been really great. But just as important, I want to thank all of you for attending and giving us an hour of your time for this first Silicon Valley Talks panel. Okay, now just two pieces of information very quickly. First, I'm not seeing it, but there should be some information popping up on the screen. Here it comes. If you'd like to keep up on events sponsored by the Byers Center for Biodesign, our co-hosts for this event today, or the Silicon Valley Archives, just sign up for one or both of the mailing lists that you see up there. I know many of you have done that already. We'll leave that up there for a minute for you to write those URLs down. We'll be having a number of events from the Silicon Valley Archives in the years I mentioned, running up to our opening, and the Byers Center has a very active program of events as well. Secondly, all of you who registered, I guess that would be all of you, will soon receive a link via email to the video recording of this panel on YouTube. When you get that link, feel free to pass it around. It's public, and you know, that way other people will enjoy it and maybe decide to come to events in the future. Okay, that's it then. Thank you all for attending today, and I'll end by saying go out there and mentor someone.